If you want to understand how successful people use their 24 hours, you first have to understand how all humans are wired to function. That's not motivational talk. It's biology. Our time management is not just a function of external tools like calendars and reminders. It's governed by internal systems. Our nervous systems, our hormonal rhythms, our patterns of focus and fatigue. Success in any domain, business, sport, creativity, or service, depends on how well individuals understand and optimize these internal rhythms across their. Let's start with the morning. Nearly all higher-forming individuals I've studied, whether elite athletes, CEOs, military special forces, or scientists, front-load their most demanding cognitive tasks in the early part of the day. This isn't accidental. It's aligned with our circadian biology. About 90 minutes after waking, cortisol levels naturally peak. That's not a stress hormone in this context. That's a performance enhancer. It mobilizes energy, increases alertness, and facilitates focus. Successful people leverage this state. They don't squander the first hours of the day answering reactive emails or browsing social media. They deploy that neurochemical advantage toward deep work tasks that require problem solving, strategic thinking, or high-level planning. And here's a key detail. They don't randomly stumble into this pattern. They structure for it. Many use what's referred to in neuroscience as deliberate time blocking. They assign specific blocks of their early day to demanding tasks and defend those blocks. Fiercely, that's not just discipline, it's neural alignment. They're synchronizing their mental effort with the brain's capacity window. Now, one thing you'll notice is that successful individuals don't work longer. They work better within the same 24 hours. And this is where ultradian rhythms, the 90-minute cycles of peak focus, followed by a trough, become important. They don't try to push through fatigue endlessly. Instead, they engage in cycles of intense concentration, followed by intentional recovery. This is how they sustain high performance without burning out. During those breaks, they're not necessarily disengaged from the goal, but they shift mental states. Some take brief walks, ideally outside in natural light. It's not a luxury. It's a protocol. Natural light triggers dopamine and serotonin release, which resets alertness and promotes a better mood. Others use respiration-based tools. Slow, deliberate breathing that activates the parasympathetic nervous system. Point is, they don't just recover by resting, they recover strategically by managing autonomic tone. Another critical theme is goal parsing. Successful people chunk large goals into daily actionable steps. This is fundamental in neuroscience. The human brain is poor at holding abstract, distant goals in working memory, but it excels when goals are bite-sized, clearly defined, and proximal. It's not just about being organized. It's about giving your brain a winnable game. When you cross off specific tasks, even microtasks, your brain releases dopamine. That dopamine creates a reinforcement loop. More motivation, more focus, more engagement. Let's talk about distractions, because understanding how successful people navigate attention is vital. Most people don't lose hours because they're lazy. They lose them because they bleed attention through distraction. Social media, context working, notifications, these are all attention vacuums. High performers treat attention like currency. They minimize inputs that fragment their focus. Some use visual cues, turning off screen notifications, using grayscale phone displays, or even altering physical workspaces to reduce cognitive clutter. These are strategic manipulations of their sensory environment to preserve attentional bandwidth. And here's something that often goes overlooked. Successful people understand that willpower is not in every decision. Every moment of self-control draws on a limited reservoir of cognitive resources. That's called ego depletion. So instead of relying on willpower, they lean into systems, routines that reduce decision fatigue. For instance, they may eat the same thing for breakfast, wear similar outfits, follow fixed morning rituals. This offloads cognitive demand and preserves their mental energy for higher order thinking. Now we move into a fascinating concept from neuroscience. The use of state depreferent memory and learning. Successful individuals deliberately create environmental and emotional states that match the type of task. For example, if they need to do creative work, writing, ideation, brainstorming, They may play specific music, change lighting, or move to a different space. These state cues become associative triggers, allowing them to enter the desired cognitive mode more rapidly. It's about encoding neural associations that optimize task performance. Let's explore movement. One of the most consistent patterns among successful individuals is the integration of physical exercise, not as a side activity, but as a pillar of their cognitive system. Movement increases blood flow to the brain, triggers BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor, and elevates mood-enhancing chemicals like endorphins and dopamine. Some train in the morning to prime alertness, others midday to break cognitive stagnation, but nearly all prioritize physicality because they understand that the brain doesn't operate in isolation. It thrives when the body is engaged. Nutrition is equally strategic. Successful individuals don't just eat for calories. They eat for neurochemical stability. They understand how glycemic spikes lead to energy crashes and how certain macronutrients affect alertness versus sedation. Many follow time-restricted feeding, aligning their eating windows with circadian rhythms. Others manage caffeine timing to optimize adenosine clearance and minimize the afternoon crash. All of this is anchored in science, not fad. Sleep is non-negotiable. The myth of the 4-hour sleep high performer has been debunked. Truly successful individuals understand that sleep is not a passive state. It's an active process of memory consolidation, emotional processing, and cellular repair. They optimize their sleep environment, temperature, light, noise. They follow protocols for winding down, lowering blue light exposure, using non-stimulating activities in the final hour, sometimes employing tools like NSDR, non-sleep deep rest protocols, if sleep isn't available. They protect sleep not because they're lazy, but because they understand that tomorrow's cognition starts tonight. Here's a concept from behavioral neuroscience that's central to how successful people are. The difference between goal setting and goal execution lies in the ability to generate internal rewards. That is, they don't just chase external validation. They've trained their brains to release dopamine from the pursuit itself. This is not trivial. When you can associate effort with reward instead of just outcome, you create a self-sustaining feedback loop. That's what allows them to push through discomfort to keep showing up even when progress is nonlinear. Let's talk about how successful people use their social interaction. You might assume they avoid them to stay focused, but actually the opposite is often true. They use them tactically. They surround themselves with individuals who provide friction and feedback. Friction is not conflict. It's challenge. Successful people value being pushed cognitively. This accelerates neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to adapt and grow. Feedback, when delivered constructively, engages the anterior cingulate cortex, an area involved in detection and learning. So they don't just accept feedback, they solicit it and they reflect on it through deliberate journaling, note-taker, or debriefing sessions. They use the hours after work to disengage from goal-directed tasks. This is essential because it allows the default mode network in the brain to activate the system responsible for creativity, self-reflection, and future planning. During this time, many engage in low-stimulation activities, reading, walking, light conversation, or practices like meditation, shown to reduce amygdala reactivity and improve attentional control. Importantly, successful people use evenings to reconnect. They understand that achievement without alignment is a recipe for burnout, so they spend time with family, engage in purpose-driven activities, or reflect on their day in ways that reinforce identity. This is not from a neuroscience standpoint, the connection between identity and behavior is reinforced through repeated narrative. The more you reflect on who you are becoming and align that with what you do, the stronger the neural pathways that support consistency and motivation in the final hours of their day. Successful individuals don't cram more work. They respect the asymmetry of the 24-hour cycle. They transition from high-performance states to restorative ones. That arc from activation to restoration is what allows them to repeat the cycle the next day with intensity and presence. They don't think in terms of just time management, they think in terms of state management. And that's the secret, because it's not just about how you spend your time. Now, there's another dimension that gets overlooked in the conversation about how high-performing individuals use their 24 hours. And that's their relationship with uncertainty and the average person spends a significant portion of the day in states of confusion or procrastination, not because they lack discipline, but because their brain is not primed to handle ambiguity well. Successful individuals train for it. They build systems that convert complexity into structured protocols. They don't just rely on grit, they create clarity through tools like checklists, frameworks, and conditional planning. There's a cognitive strategy known as implementation intention. If X happens, then I will do Y. This primes the brain to automate decisions when variables arise. For example, instead of just saying, I'll work out tomorrow, they commit to, if it's 6:30 a.m. and I'm awake, then I will start my 30-minute run. That simple shift recruits areas of the prefrontal cortex responsible for intention execution. In doing so, they reduce friction and increase follow-through. Over time, this becomes a kind of cognitive scaffolding that supports consistency even under stress. Successful individuals also approach failure differently. Neurologically, failure triggers error detection systems in the brain, particularly the anterior cingulate cortex and insula. For many, this causes avoidance behavior. But high performers they train their nervous system not to recoil, but to respond. They reframe failure as data. That framing isn't just psychological. It changes the dopaminergic narrative. When you see failure as feedback, you retain motivation. When you internalize failure as identity, motivation collapses. This is where reflection rituals come in. Many successful people engage in structured end-of-day reviews, not vague journaling, but tactical reflection. What worked? What didn't? What would I do differently next? This taps into metacognition, thinking about thinking, and activates the dorsal prefrontal cortex, which helps rewire learning in real time. These reflection loops are short but powerful. 5 minutes of structured self-inquiry per day creates accelerated pattern recognition, which is critical for complex problem solving. Let's pause on something subtle but crucial: their control over inner dialogue. You might think self-T-talk is a soft topic, but it's tightly linked to neural circuitry. The words we say to ourselves influence our stress response, cognitive resilience, and emotional regulation. Successful people are not immune to negative thoughts, but they regulate the volume and content of their inner. When pressure hits, they default to scripts that prime execution, not panic. That script might be as simple as breathe or control what you can, or one task, one moment. Their neural cues practiced and embedded through repetition. Now let's move into the often neglected space of novelty. Successful individuals deliberately inject novelty into their routine, not because they are bored, but because novelty enhances neural. The brain is designed to encode new stimuli more deeply than familiar ones. Even something as simple as taking a different route to work, learning a new language fragment, or eating with a non-dominant hand lights up the hippocampus and boosts memory and adaptability. That's not random curiosity. That's calculated neuroexpansion. Let's also address digital hygiene, because the average modern brain is under relentless sensory assault. Higher forming individuals are not lights, but they have strict boundaries around tech. Many use digital sunsets, a time after which screens are off. Others use time-omitting software or even lock their devices in physical safes during deep work periods. These sound like extreme measures to some, but from a neuroscience standpoint, they are reclaiming control over dopamine cycles that are otherwise hijacked by endless scrolling and algorithmic manipulation. They understand that attention is not just a productivity tool. It's their most scarce and valuable resource. Let's talk about decision-making. While some may appear naturally decisive, it's often the result of trained cognitive processes. They use heuristics, mental shortcuts that reduce decision fatigue. They also use first principles thinking, that is, they break complex problems down to their most basic truths and then reason up from there. That's not just intellectual, it's neurological efficiency. It engages systems of logical computation rather than emotional reactivity. So in their 24-hour day, successful people make fewer, faster, and higher quality decisions, not because they're smarter, but because they've pruned the cognitive load. Another pattern is the use of cognitive anchors. These are stable points in the day that provide predictability. For example, they may always begin the day with sunlight and hydration. They may always end the day with a cold shower or reading. These rituals reduce anxiety by providing neural certainty. They serve as transition points between modes from sleep to alertness, from work to recovery. And these transitions are key. The brain doesn't switch modes instantly. It requires a ramp. Successful people design these ramps consciously, not by accident. Social dynamics are also structured. Successful individuals are not universally extroverted or introverted. They are selectively social. They recognize the energy cost of certain interactions and budget accordingly. They may have no meeting days or allocate social energy to high-leverage conversations, mentorship, brainstorming, feedback loops. They don't say yes out of obligation. They say yes out of alignment. That's not selfishness. It's energy economics. One of the most underappreciated time tools successful people use is anticipation. They look ahead, not just to plan, but to emotionally simulate outcome. This recruits the brain's default mode network and ventromedial prefrontal cortex, which are responsible for future projection. By mentally rehearsing both best and worst-case scenarios, they buffer themselves against surprise that reduces stress and enhances performance when the real moment arrives. This process, known as episodic future thinking, effectively shifts their perception of time. They don't just live in 24-hour chunks, they operate across temporal horizons. And then here's another layer. Successful people allocate time for boredom, not endless boredom, just enough to trigger creative thinking. When the brain is not being constantly stimulated, it enters what's called a diffuse mode. This is when unexpected ideas, connections, and insights arise. That's why many breakthroughs come during walks, showers, or quiet time. These are not moments of disengagement. They are cognitive incubation windows. They're built into the day with intention. Let's not forget emotional regulation. A higher forming brain is not absent of emotion, it is fluent in it. Successful individuals build emotional granularity, the ability to name and differentiate emotional states. This activates language processing areas like Broca's area and dampens limbic system overactivity. In plain terms, by labeling emotions, they reduce emotional overwhelm that allows for better decisions, healthier relationships, and more composure under stress. Now, let's address a common myth that success requires constant hustle. In reality, it requires oscillation. Peak performers treat energy like a wave, not a straight line. They build recovery into their system. This might be through napping, breathwork, music, micro-meditations, or simply nonlinear play. The point is that they don't wait until they're burnt out to rest. They rest before they need to preemptively. That's physiological maintenance, not indulgence. Finally, let's zoom out. The most successful people don't just manage time. They manage identity. They know that behavior follows identity, so they don't say, "I want to be productive." They say, "I am someone who honors my commitments." That identity is reinforced daily through micro-accessions. Each time they show up, even for a 5-minute task, they're not just doing the work, they're voting for the kind of person they are, and over weeks, months, years, that identity becomes embodied. Every one of us has 24 hours. That is the one variable that is completely equal across the entire human population. What differentiates people is not how much time they have, but how they align time with biology, cognition, values, and identity. When you master that alignment, you don't just get more done. You become someone whose very presence is anchored in clarity, intention, and effectiveness, not through hacks, through harmony with your own system. If we go further into the neurobiological underpinnings of time use, we come to something called interoception, your brain's perception of your internal bodily state. Most people think productivity is only a matter of scheduling. But successful individuals understand that how they feel inside their body is directly tied to what they are capable of doing cognitively and emotionally at any given time. They learn to read their own signals. When heart rate rises unnecessarily, when breathing becomes shallow, when tension builds in their shoulders, when their thoughts speed up or fragment, these are not subtle distractions. They are signals from the autonomic nervous system indicating shifts in internal state. And the most successful individuals don't ignore those signals. They respond to them, regulate them, and use them as data to adjust course in real time. For instance, let's say they notice rising anxiety before an important presentation. Instead of suppressing it or pushing through blindly, they deploy a specific physiological tool like the SAY physiological sigh, a pattern of breathing that reduces sympathetic arousal. This isn't guesswork. It's precision. 1 or 2 deep inhales followed by a long exhale activates the parasympathetic system, shifting heart rate variability and restoring. In that moment, they're not just calming down. They're enhancing cognition because the prefrontal cortex functions better when autonomic arousal is in the optimal range. Let's pivot to something else often overlooked. Transitions, the points between activities. Transitions matter. Successful individuals don't just shift from meeting to task to call to project without deliberate decompression. They create transition rituals, even 60 seconds of breath work, walking around the room, journaling a sentence, closing their eyes. These aren't breaks, they're neural resets. Transitions allow the brain to disengage from one cognitive context and enter another without them. Cognitive residue builds up, leading to fatigue and error-prone thinking. You can think of it like clearing RAM in a computer. You're not slowing down, you're optimizing for what's next. Another important element, mental contrasting. This is different from visualization. Most people visualize success. Successful individuals visualize success and the obstacles. They picture the achievement, yes, but also the friction. What might go wrong, what might tempt them off track, what resistance they might feel. This builds what's called implementation readiness. It prepares the brain to act, not just dream. It activates circuits of effort, anticipation in the anterior mid-S cingulate cortex, one of the key areas that helps us overcome resistance. So when the hard part comes, and it always does, the nervous system is ready. Let's also look at how successful individuals deal with others' time. This isn't about domination or control. It's about precision and respect. They show up on time not because they're polite, but because they understand that temporal respect is cognitive respect. They keep meetings short because they value their attention and yours. They don't talk in circles because they've prepared their thoughts. They don't steal time through disorganization. They create time for others by creating clarity. This reinforces a loop of mutual efficiency, which builds trust and traction in teams. Another layer is their relationship with boredom. You might assume that high performers are constantly stimulated or always chasing novelty, but that's not true. They have a high tolerance for monotony because they understand that repetition is how mastery is built. Repetition builds insulation around neural pathways. Myelination, making processes faster, more automatic. That's how habits go from effortful to effortless. They know that boredom is not a cue to quit. It's often a signal that the brain is moving from novelty seeking to consolidate. So they stick with routines long enough to allow neuroplasticity to take root. This is how skill compounds. Let's explore how they make time feel expansive. Because time is not just chronological, it's psychological. Successful people know how to stretch time through presence. When you are fully engaged in a task, not multitasking, not thinking about 3 other things, your perception of time slows down. This is not metaphorical, it's measurable. Activity in the posterior insular cortex, an area tied to time perception, changes when we are in flow states. High performers use presence to increase temporal density. In 1 hour, they might achieve what others spread across 3 distracted hours. It's not longer time, it's deeper time. Let's also talk about the stories we tell ourselves about time. Many people wake up already in deficit. I'm behind. That triggers anxiety, which narrows attention and reduces flexibility. Successful individuals, in contrast, start the day with a sense of command, not scarcity. They don't pretend the day is longer than it is. They just decide what matters most and move with that in mind. They don't speak of time as something they're at war with. They frame it as something they're in alignment with. That framing changes behavior. Another element is strategic quitting. Successful people are not relentless in all things. They are relentless in the right things. They are willing to quit paths that no longer serve their trajectory. That's not failure, that's recalibration. They understand opportunity cost, the value of the time they're not spending on other things. So they make decisions, not just based on sunk cost, but on alignment with current goals. In doing so, they reclaim time that would otherwise be wasted on inertia. And then there's play, not frivolous, unstructured chaos, but deliberate engagement with the world without direct productivity goals. Play enhances creativity, social bonding, and stress resilience. It activates the brain's default mode network, which is responsible for divergent thinking. Successful individuals protect time for play, whether that's sport, games, music, or pure exploration. It's not an escape from performance, it's part of the performance architecture. When they travel or take breaks, they don't default to the same vacation or weekend every time. They vary stimuli, a different culture, a new activity, a surprising book, a conversation outside their domain. Why? Because novelty increases the subjective richness of experience, and that slows perceived time. A 2-day trip filled with newness can feel longer and more vivid than 2 weeks of sameness. They don't just escape, they enrich. And here's something counterintuitive. The most successful individuals often subtract more than they add. They don't seek to cram their calendar, they seek to clean it. They remove tasks that don't have asymmetric payoff. They delete meetings, they let go of obligations that no longer align with their mission. Every deletion is an act of courage and strategy, because time isn't made by doing more. It's reclaimed by doing less of what doesn't matter. Let's go one layer deeper into the nervous system's response to overload. When we stack too many obligations, the amygdala begins to hijack the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain required for thoughtful decision-making. Successful individuals sense the early signals of this restlessness, brain fog, irritability, and instead of pushing through blindly, they intervene early. They modulate their state through recovery or refocus. They've trained themselves to regulate before meltdown. That's not just self-control, that's neural fluency. To be clear, what's also remarkable is how they think about the end of the day. Most people stumble into sleep. High performers land the day. They have a wind-down ritual. They review the day with a few notes or gratitude. They dim lights to cue melatonin release. They prepare their space for tomorrow. They might use low-level sensory inputs, music, stretching, slow breathing to shift into a parasympathetic state. These aren't rituals for ritual's sake. They're neural bridges into rest designed to close the loop cleanly. Their 24 hours are not built reactively. They're designed with intent. That doesn't mean every day is rigid or joyless. Far from it. It means every hour has a purpose. Sometimes that purpose is deep focus. Sometimes it's active recovery. Sometimes it's laughter. Sometimes it's silent. But there is alignment between what they do and who they want to be. And that alignment creates momentum. That's the real advantage, because when you look at it from the outside, you may think they just work harder. From the inside, it's more nuanced. They work smarter, yeah. But more than that, they work in flow with themselves. They understand how their brain and body interact with time. They don't just use 24 hours. They sculpt it like an artist, like a system builder, like someone who understands that time isn't just it's a medium, a material, one that can be molded into something exceptional if you